welcome to another It's a Grand Life. My name is Craig Nash, and we're just delighted to be here with you again. And thank you so much for joining us. And if you're old enough to appreciate this podcast, then you're going to remember Paul Harvey from radio days. And when Paul was on the radio, he would say things like, and now the rest of the story. And today we're going to give you what I consider to be the rest of the story, or the enlightening moment for yours truly, when I realized that this little local podcast could have national reaches across this whole great land, when I was introduced to our guest today, Gail Engel from the Grand Family Coalition in Loveland, Colorado. Gail has been involved in this for so long and has had such made such an impact for grand families across the country. And if you are part of a grand family, you need to know her and know the work that she's doing, not only in Colorado, but also nationally. But Gail, thank you so much for joining us here on It's a Grand Life.
Thank you very much for having me.
So we're going to, Lord willing, do this in two podcasts, because we want to get to know Gail a little bit, and then we want to talk about the specific work that she's been doing, because I think you're going to find that really impactful in your own personal situation. So Gail, when did you feel the call to launch the Grand Family Coalition?
Well, it's really been quite a few years. My grandson was born to my daughter, who has some pretty significant mental health issues. And we had struggled with her support of her getting help for her mental health for years. And so when she had her son, my grandson, we knew that there was going to be some struggles. So we moved her in with us, and I became a grand family. I became this grandmother who was trying desperately to protect her daughter, protect my grandson. And she did not deal well with her mental illness at all. And so my grandson eventually came to live with us. I tried to find resources for my daughter, tried to find resources for us. I didn't want child welfare involved in my life. I don't want government in my life, but I knew that I had to get support from somewhere. So I went to our county's child welfare department and asked for help, and realized he was safe with me, so they weren't going to help. There was very little resources for my my daughter, for him, for us. And as I tried to find resources for myself and my husband to figure out how do we manage this, I did eventually find a support group. When I found that support group, it was a blessing to me. I found out I was not the only grandparent raising a grandchild.
Right.
And so we did that for a year or two. And I started to realize how many grandparents there were, not just in my own city, but across the state. And I realized that other people were having a hard time finding resources. As I sat in these support groups, I was said, well, get an APR. Well, what the heck is an APR? well, you need to get custody. You need to get guardianship. And I'm like, wow, okay. And then they started mentioning TANF, and I'm like, what the heck is TANF? And how do I'm having struggle paying my bills and all these other things. How do I find that? And really nobody knew. And so I started delving into resources and finding out what there was, what kind of legal resources there were. And as I built my own resource, I started to realize that other people needed it. So my co-founder and I, who actually was in the court system with 4 children.
Wow.
Actually, 3 were in the system. And while there was 2 different cases, and while those 3 children were in the court system, another child was born who was deaf and blind. I would go with her to the court hearings, and I would support her in her emotional journey. And that's when the two of us realized Grand Family Coalition needs to be created. We're not the only ones. So we launched it.
That's just such a great story. So you've got two grandmas thinking you're sitting on the sidelines, checking out the prices to a flight to Florida, hypothetically, of course.
Yeah.
And your whole life was turned upside down for a great
my
cause.
gosh.
And it's really for your loved ones, your grandkids.
Yes.
And so you've got a colleague, you both are arm in arm, saying it's now time to take this to something of real substance, and that's the Grand Family Coalition, and I'm sure that touches all of Colorado, correct?
Well, Grand Family Coalition started out just here in our local city.
Okay.
There's two little towns that are right here close, and within a short amount of time, I was growing much faster. I was reaching people across the state, and the more connections I made, the further my roots went. So it has definitely grown. I've been doing this for 16 years. Grand Family Coalition wasn't actually officially formed until 2015, but it's grown substantially since then.
Well, Gail, what would you say is the mission and vision of the Grand Family Coalition?
Oh my gosh. We know our mission is that we connect grand families to each other and to services. We provide a community of support so that they can be connected.
And that sounds absolutely vital to because when we started this podcast, I just said, if we could just help one family. And after the first broadcast, we realized we connected with way more than that. But, but when you don't have connection, you just feel like you're here alone. And then it's not even counting the financial constraints and everything else. But you and your partner set out to put a coalition together in the greater Loveland area to really make a difference for the folks in Colorado. And it's really taken off for you.
Yes, it has. Like I said, we started here in our little town. The history of this is really much bigger than just me and my co-founder. So it was in 2006 that there was 3 or 4 grandparents that had a little small group together here in Larimer County. And they went to our Office on Aging. We have a college here, Colorado State University. They went to the Extension office. They went to Office on Aging. They went to a few of the community agencies here in Larimer County and said, we need some help. We want a support group. We want some support from our community. We're not alone. And so these agencies got together and they created a little organization called Larimer County Alliance for Grand Families. And those agencies pulled their dollars together and they created a Kinship Navigator program, in which started a support group. And it was housed under the mental health facility, and Office on Aging provided dollars. The Larimer County Child Welfare created some dollars. And it kind of took off a little bit. But that's when I realized that when my husband and I started going, it wasn't enough. Just a support group wasn't enough. And so that's when we decided to create Grand Family Coalition, I needed to be introduced to the resources. I needed to be introduced to what I could do to support my child. And so I worked with this little organization, this Kinship Navigator program. I reached out to our state, I reached out to our county, and I said, we need some support. It can't just be here in this little town. And the more I learned about what was going on, just not in our city, but our state, and then in our national network of people, it was just, I was just amazed at how many people there were. There's 2.7 million children in the US being raised by grandparents. And
Wow.
that enough was enough for me to say, I gotta do something. I can't just sit here. Doing something is better than nothing.
Right.
And so we really reached out to our city. I remember going to the mayor of Loveland, Colorado, and he said to me, 2 grandparents from Fort Collins, Colorado are not going to change legislation, are not going to change things. I will never forget that, because I will tell you, we've made some changes. And so, yes, we have spread, but it's not enough. Even today, after being in business for almost 10 years, we have a ton of grandparents calling us from Southern Colorado saying there's no support here.
Wow.
We need something. And we hear it across the state. We hear it across the nation. People do not have enough support. And I can't give it. I can barely run the little organization I have here. And so I really reached out to other agencies and started working on how can we bring this awareness. So my first step was my county to say, do something. And then I reached out to our state, Colorado Department of Human Services kinship unit really does a lot of work. And her and I have a connection with each other that's a working relationship, but we've known each other long enough that we really connect with each other. She has the heart of grand families in every bit of work that she does. And so I work very closely with her. I now work with legislation here in Colorado. And then I connected with Generations United out of Washington, D.C., which is a national organization for grandparents raising grandchildren. I started to realize how big it was. It wasn't just here. And so Generations United started a Grand Voice Network a few years ago. Probably 2008 or 9. I don't really remember. But I became the Grand Voice representative for Colorado. And so then it really took off.
And that the Generations United group, they literally have the whole country, correct? That they're trying to
Yes.
to really bring awareness, and
Yeah.
I was amazed and I know they're getting ready for their annual conference in
Yep.
Washington, and they you really want to learn about what's going on in the grand families. You probably need to Google Generations United and just see, well, this is way bigger than
Yeah.
you can imagine, but yet you've been right in the part of it, in the middle of it, and really at the forefront of moving a lot of the legislation and a lot of the organizational activities to really benefit grand families. And what Gail, what really about this work has given you the most joy?
I seem to be one of those people that I'm like a little Energizer bunny. I just don't seem to stop. I can't believe other people don't work as hard as I do. I literally sit at my kitchen table from usually about 6 o'clock in the morning until 8 o'clock at night working. So I'm kind of a foolish person about that, but it gives me so much joy to be able to know that other people did not have to go through that hard journey I did. The struggles have been overwhelming. Like I said, my grandson is 16 years old. We've had a 16-year-long journey of trying to support this kid. From not knowing why his behaviors were so difficult, not knowing how to navigate the school system, not knowing how to navigate the legal system. Everything about raising this child has been a challenge, emotionally, we talk about it that these children have trauma from their parents abandoning them. And I was fortunate enough, my daughter did not abandon her son. We just knew she didn't have the abilities to support him the way he needed. And so me having to support my daughter in her journey, support my grandson in his journey, has caused me to have a lifelong change. And I'm struggling. And I tell people all the time that mental illness has a way of ravaging through a family. And it definitely ravaged through ours. And it is still here. And I knew that I could not do this alone. I needed support of some kind. And so I went for way too long without support. And now I have families that come to me, Gail, you're such a blessing. I have families that get those resources immediately. The minute they come to a group, I can tell them how the legal system works, where to go to get legal resources, what the difference is between guardianship and adoption, where they can get the mental health supports. I encourage families to go get an evaluation, to get a medical diagnosis for their child early, so that they can navigate school systems, so that they can get the educational plans for their children. We got to give these families tools.
Right.
Up front and at the beginning. I didn't have those things. So that gives me such gratitude to know that somebody else didn't have to walk that journey I walked.
Well, and I know that's a blessing to our listeners, because many of us are brand new in this journey, and you've been at this for 16 years and bringing so much positive change to grand families across the country. It has been absolutely a pleasure to get to know you on this podcast. And when we get together next time, we want to talk about some of the accomplishments that the Grand Family Coalition has been a part of. And I know that'll just be such a blessing to our listeners. And Gail, we're just so delighted that you've been a guest here on It's a Grand Life, and look forward to seeing you next time when we talk about some of your accomplishments. But before we leave here, could you tell our listeners what It's a Grand Life and our listeners could do in Michigan to make a difference in the lives of the grand families we encounter here? I mean, how could we get started here with what you've already done?
Well, I really say the first thing you need to do is come together. Somehow find a way, find a church that will allow you to be together. It is those with lived experience that are going to support others. So whether you've been in this journey for a month or two or been in it for years, come together to support each other. Child welfare doesn't have a clue of what you're going through. You need to come together so you can do this. And there are resources there in Michigan. You just have to all gather together and make it happen. Start a small support group and it will grow. Whether that support group, because of COVID, we can now do it online. So start an online support group. That doesn't take much. Somebody who loves to do research, find those resources within your community. If you go to our website, you'll see that there are 5 major things that grandparents need. Find those resources and make sure that you communicate that. Start a Facebook group. You can do a private group. It is essential.
That is great advice, and we do have a Facebook group for it's a Grand Life, and we would love to utilize that as a resource for not only folks in Michigan but folks all over the country. But you have really taken the lid off this, and we can't wait to get into this again on our next podcast. It's a Grand Life, and Gail, thank you so much for whetting our appetite, and I can't wait to dig into this further at our next podcast. Thank you so much for being our guest here on It's a Grand Life.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for another It's a Grand Life. Remember to never waste your pain. God can use your situation to bless others even halfway around the world. Be sure and subscribe to It's a Grand Life on our Facebook page, as well as YouTube and any of the various podcast channels that feature the Grand Life podcast. When it comes to raising a grand family, remember the words of the Apostle Paul, who said in 1 Corinthians 13, "Love is patient, love is kind, it always protects, always trusts, always hopes, and always perseveres. Love never fails." In leading your grand family, it's going to take faith, hope, and a whole lot of love. Please reach out to me. I can be a blessing to you and pray for you, or help you connect to free resources that can make your journey a little easier.